Hello, this is literally Majora. You can call me Majora if you want, but my real name is Benny. So, for my first official intentional Wednesday video, this is my contribution to Zelda Month. Zelda Month is a thing that was started by the YouTuber Peanut Butter Gamer to celebrate Skyward Sword's release, which, if only he knew. That's a joke. I actually really like Skyward Sword. I promise you that's a joke. And every November, people usually still celebrate Zelda Month, so I am going to be taking part this year by doing some pretty brief theory videos. So I'll be uploading a total of 4 theories this month, because there are 4 Wednesdays in November, and that way I don't have to dedicate all of my videos to Zelda, just 1 a week. A few quick things before we get started. None of these are being presented as fact. These theories are just meant to be things that I thought were kind of fun to think about. Some are more far-fetched than others. Also, if one of the theories that I present this month doesn't match up or fit with one of the theories that you have already accepted as fact from another bigger YouTuber, that's okay. You're allowed to disagree, and you're allowed to not have to make everything fit together. Guess what? No theories are fact until they are presented as canon by Nintendo. That's just the way it is. If you haven't played every single game, this little spoiler card will come up every time I'm about to say something that's pretty spoilery. So, as long as you skip ahead like 10 to 20 seconds, you should be a-okay. Now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's get into my very far-fetched theory for today. So, Navi. She's a little blue fairy. Although she is capable of changing color to indicate different warnings or things that you need to know. In Ocarina of Time, the Deku Tree summons her to help our hero through his quest. It's unclear if she's just a regular fairy or if she's something different and special. The Kokiri children do imply that Navi's abilities seem to be abilities that all of their fairies do have. For instance, Z-targeting, or L-targeting if you're playing on the 3DS. So this theory is definitely one of my weakest, but also one that I really love. So what if Navi is actually Fi? Yes, I know, 90% of everyone else says Fi. Let me live my life. You might think that their personalities automatically debunk this, but let me remind you that Fi has been slumbering in the Master Sword for at least a few hundred years and existed for 1,000 before that. And at the end of Skyward Sword, she's changed. She's learned how to feel happiness, particularly because of Link. We also know that while it didn't make it into the game, Navi was supposed to be a little bit in love with Link and jealous of Zelda. So if Fi's very first thing to ever make her happy is Link, is it that much of a stretch to say she might, over time, fall in love with him or different incarnations of him? So, as far as this being actually possible goes, my theory is that the Great Deku Tree summoning Navi is actually him using the last of his strength to create Navi from Fi. We know that the Deku Tree is some kind of powerful spirit that watches over the Kokiri children. He has to have some form of magic. When you go forward in time 7 years, the Deku Tree's death has caused the forest to fall into disarray. There are monsters everywhere, and the Kokiri children have to cower inside their homes. So I theorize that with the last of his remaining magic after Ganondorf attacked him, he summons Fi, or at least a part of her, to become a fairy to assist Link in defeating Ganondorf. It's that final use of his magic that makes it impossible for him to survive even though Link defeats Goma. This broken off piece of Fi could be very similar to Ciela, the spirit of courage from Phantom Hourglass. When Bellum attacked her, Ciela split herself into 2 pieces, one that contained her consciousness and one that contained her powers as the spirit of courage. I find it interesting to note that In game, Ciela looks white with maybe a pinkish edge to her before she becomes the Spirit of Courage, but all of her official artwork seems to be of a white and blue fairy that looks a lot like Navi. This Ciela-esque split could also account for why Navi doesn't show the same abilities as Fi. You know, dowsing, probability prediction, repeating literally everything everyone says ever. Navi could be Fi's consciousness without her abilities. One big similarity that Navi does have to Fi is that she seems to be very knowledgeable about all kinds of enemies. This, for Fi, is because she has a database programmed into her that tells her things, and she has to scan things and learn new information that she can store for later. I also theorize that once your journey is over, the Deku Tree's magic has finally worn out, and Navi has to return to the blade and reunite with the other part of Fi. That's also another parallel to Fi. At the end of Skyward Sword, once your journey is over, the Master Sword has to be placed in the pedestal, and Fi has to leave you. In both cases, these are very emotional scenes, and I honestly think that scene in Skyward Sword with Fi was meant to be a reference to Navi's departure. I used to believe that post-game, Navi permanently became a fairy. But not just any fairy. My original theory was that she became a great fairy. Specifically, the Queen of the Fairies from Wind Waker. I came to this conclusion because, obviously, Fi looks like the Queen of the Fairies. Her design was very obviously based off of the Queen of the Fairies. She's almost a sort of combination of the Queen and a regular Great Fairy, just with the Master Sword's color scheme. But because of Breath of the Wild, depending on where you think it falls on the timeline, I personally think that it's sort of an inevitable point that all three split timelines will eventually reach through different means and different events. This part of my theory is kind of disproven because Fi makes a small appearance in Breath of the Wild. But the split theory could account for this as well because part of Fi remained in the blade, and that other part of Fi could have gone on to become a great fairy. So if we treat this theory like we really, really believe it, it does raise a couple questions. What about Tada and Tail? They're supposed to be Navi's Termina counterparts, right? So if she's not just a normal fairy, what does that make them? You don't see any fairies other than Tada and Tail that aren't pink in Majora's Mask at all, unless you count the Great Fairies and their pieces. You don't see any fairies that look like Tail, period, in any of the games. Could this brother and sister duo be a split form of Fi's Terminian counterpart? And who do we know that could even be called an alternate dimension version of Fi? But that's something I want to save for a later video. Thanks for listening. Friday's video is also going to be video game related, although not Zelda related. And then as far as Monday goes, I haven't really planned anything, to be honest. And then next Wednesday, I'm unsure of which video I'm going to put up, but I do have 3 more theories already planned out. Bye!